Hello, my name is Nick Deborah. I am an author and educator in the fields of data visualization and dashboard design. And in this short video, I wanted to talk about a technique that you've probably seen many times before, maybe used on dashboards before, which is showing the percentage above or below target that each value is on the dashboard. The idea being that we're trying to draw attention to metrics that require it, or give the audience an idea of sort of, how things are doing overall. Are things looking good or bad? And why this actually works surprisingly poorly, and what I use instead, which is a technique called action dots. And so you've almost certainly seen or probably even created dashboards with these kinds of indicators on them, right? So, this is say at 6.8% below target, 3.5% above target. Great. So what requires attention? How are we doing in operations, right? Very difficult to tell, in fact, because the problem with this method, or one of the problems with this method, is that unless the current value is exactly the same as the target value, it gets flagged. And so we end up basically flagging everything all the time. I have a very technical term for this issue. I call this Christmas tree syndrome, because our dashboard is lit up red and green, except in this case, it's Christmas 365 days a year, because this is what the dashboard looks like all the time. And so flagging everything is basically the same as flagging nothing. And just by virtue of that fact alone, this should almost kind of disqualify this as a useful way of drawing attention to metrics that require it on a dashboard. But the problems don't actually end there. If we have a closer look at some of the metrics on this dashboard, all right, well, employee satisfaction currently sitting at 5.2 on 10. We all probably agree that is not good. If our employees are giving us 5.2 on 10, we probably need to take action on it. And lo and behold, actually, this kind of worked on the dashboard. It looked bad, 47% below target. And so, great, kind of nailed it there. But if we look at some other metrics, like we also have customer count here. And so that is 5.2% below target. And when we have a closer look, we realize, yes, this is indeed a crisis. Looks bad on the dashboard and it is bad. Great, so far so good. We also have a metric called cash on hand, and that is also, just by coincidence, down 5.2% as well. It's down by the same amount. But when we have a closer look at that, we realize, actually, you know what? This was fine. This is a nothing burger. It didn't require any attention at all. The problem is that it looks the same, right? And so, but for cash on hand, maybe it's just a really volatile metric, bounces around a lot. And so, down 5.2% means nothing. Whereas for customer count, it's a disaster. Or if we look at something like unit production here, 8.7% below target, that looks like a crisis, right? But just for fun, let's look at the last 14 days of that metric. Okay, so, this is the actual value. The green line here is the target. So, this looked really bad, but is this really bad? Like that, 8.7% below target, that's this little distance here. No, this is just a really volatile metric, right? It's 8.7% below target, one day. It'll be like 12% above target the next day, and 5% below the one after that. And none of that really requires attention. But this indicator really made it look like it did require attention. And so this is kind of wrong, right? Or a website availability, less than 1% below target, no action required, right? Doesn't look like much on the dashboard. Again, just for fun, let's look at the last 14 days. Okay, so normally, this is website availability here, and normally it's at, around 100 or 99.9%. And so its current value, 99.1, is actually very unusual, right? And in fact, when you think about it, if we're an e-commerce company or something, what this means is that about 1 out of every 100 page requests to our website is failing. And so this could be, in fact, the worst problem on the entire dashboard. And yet the dashboard made it look like nothing, right? Less than 1% off target. So once again, kind of wrong sentiment, wrong indicator. And so on a dashboard like this, sometimes the dashboard developers or designers will say, okay, well, instead of flagging everything, let's maybe hide the small deviations from target, right? And so we'll only show anything that's more than, say, 2% off target. And this looks like progress, because at least we're not flagging everything all the time. But if we go back to that slide we were looking at a moment ago, remember website availability here? Well, this was less than 2% off target. In fact, it was less than 1% off target. And yet it was the worst problem on the entire dashboard. And so sometimes small deviations from targets can be huge problems. And so we can't do this. We have to show all of the deviations all the time. And so what this means is that this is going to be very time consuming, right? Because big deviations might be problems and they might not be. Small deviations might be problems and they might not be. It really depends on the metric. It's different from one metric to the next. And so the user is going to have to go through each one of these one by one, and it might take them 30 or 40 minutes to actually review all of these and try to figure out, do any of these actually genuinely require attention or not? And on July 13th here, they might realize, you know what? Actually, none of this required attention. All of it was actually okay. And then, if we go to the next day, so now we're on July 14th here, what happens? Well, now we have a completely different set of red and green indicators. And so the user has to start all over again, right? Is this one okay? Is this one okay? Is this really a problem? Is this not a problem? And so again, it's going to be very time consuming. And on this day, they might realize after 30 or 40 minutes of tedious work that in fact, there are crises happening here, multiple crises happening simultaneously. In fact, this is the worst day we've ever had in operations. And yet, didn't look really different than the day before, which was a completely normal day. And so again, that should just kind of immediately disqualify this as a useful way of showing what requires attention and how we're doing, because the worst day we've ever had should look different than a completely normal day. And so there are actually several of these types of what I call sentiment indicators. We just saw one of them, right? Percentage above below target, but there are, of course, versus previous period, versus trailing average, single threshold, good, satisfactory, poor. And actually all of these have similar problems, right? They basically flag everything all the time. And it's quite difficult to tell what actually requires attention or not. Is there a better alternative? I think so. I've been using something called action dots for a number of years now. And so a dashboard with action dots looks something like this, right? And so really, for the first time, compared to all the other methods that I mentioned, we're not flagging everything all the time. We're only flagging the metrics that actually require attention. And so really, this is the only method that I'm aware of that actually defeats the Christmas tree, right? We're only actually flagging metrics that require attention, not flagging everything all the time. Obvious question, I know probably everybody who's watching this is asking, is like, okay, how did the dashboard know where to put, these dark red, light red, medium red and green dots? Lots to talk about there, but I don't have time to cover it in this video. But if you want to know more about action dots and many other topics around how to make dashboards that people actually like and that they are still using 6 months down the line, I cover all of this in my Practical Dashboards course. Most of the time I deliver this as private workshops, either in person or online, for 15 to 60 employees of a single organization. But I'm also delivering it in person in Amsterdam. If you happen to be watching this before the end of October 2025, you happen to be in Central Europe, you can register for that. Just go to my website, practicalreporting.com. You'll find links there, and there's a discount code on the screen right now, which will give you 15% off. So I hope you found that of interest. Thanks very much for watching.